Sometimes silence isn't peace. It is preparation. It is a stillness before the storm, a quieting of the soul before truth cracks through the dark sky like lightning. Isabelle Marie Calderon stood before the full-length mirror in her expansive walk-in closet, gently smoothing the fabric of her champagne-colored evening gown. At 3 months pregnant, her body had just begun its subtle, beautiful transformation, though only the most observant might notice the soft, gentle curve hidden beneath the expertly tailored silk. Her amber eyes met their reflection in the silver-rimmed glass, and she unconsciously bit the inside of her cheek, a nervous childhood habit that always surfaced whenever deep anxiety crept into her mind. From the cavernous master bedroom of their sprawling Greenwich estate, the sound of Nathaniel's irritated, heavy footsteps echoed sharply against the hardwood floors. "We're going to be late," he called out, his strictly controlled voice carrying that familiar, biting edge that consistently made her stomach knot with dread. Isabelle took one last, lingering look at herself. Her deep brunette hair was swept into a flawless, elegant updo. Her diamond jewelry was purposefully minimal, and her facial expression was as serene and placid as she had perfected it over years of attending such stifling formal events. "Coming," she replied softly, grabbing her beaded clutch and stepping out into the bedroom. Nathaniel James Everett stood impatiently by the bedroom door, looking every inch the phenomenally successful businessman in his perfectly tailored midnight blue tuxedo. His steely blue eyes scanned her appearance with the cold, critical detachment she had tragically grown accustomed to over the years. "That dress," he began, a frown tugging at the corners of his mouth, before he abruptly shook his head in dismissal. "Never mind. The car is waiting." The long ride to the Whitmore Hotel in Manhattan passed in a suffocating, tense silence. Isabelle stared blankly out the tinted window, watching the vibrant city lights blur into a rapid cascade of golden white. In the quiet of the luxury sedan, her father Joseph's warm, comforting voice from years ago echoed reassuringly in her mind, "Just breathe, sweetheart." Slowly, imperceptibly, she placed a highly protective hand over her stomach, drawing a quiet, profound comfort from the fragile life growing within her. The annual business gala was already in full, roaring swing by the time their driver pulled up to the curb. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a warm, opulent glow over the expansive hotel ballroom, where New York's absolute elite mingled with effortless, practiced polish. Isabelle immediately recognized faces from dozens of past corporate events. She saw the exact same rehearsed plastic smiles and heard the exact same orchestrated, shallow conversations about stock, portfolios, offshore accounts, and luxury property development. "I need to speak with some investors," Nathaniel said briskly, his predatory gaze already scanning the glittering crowd for his next opportunity. "Try not to look so utterly withdrawn tonight." He squeezed her upper arm just tightly, enough to make his cruel point, sending a flash of pain through her before, abruptly disappearing into the thick sea of black tuxedos and glittering designer gowns. Left to her own devices, Isabelle made her way slowly to their assigned table. Politely exchanging pleasant, empty greetings with familiar acquaintances along the way, her keenly observant nature, honed by years of walking on eggshells, picked up on the tiny, hidden subtleties that others might easily miss. She noticed the anxious way Nathaniel's executive assistant kept darting nervous glances toward the outdoor terrace doors. She saw the slight, uncontrolled tremor in a board member's hand as she raised her crystal water glass to her lips, and she felt the sudden, heavy hush that fell over certain hushed conversations whenever she drew near. An hour passed in a blur of polite small talk. Then, too, Nathaniel remained conspicuously absent from their table, though Isabelle occasionally caught brief glimpses of him moving through the dense crowd. He was always moving, and always drifting toward the terrace. A heavy, suffocating tension gripped her chest. It was that exact same gut instinct she had learned to trust over years of deep introspection, the quiet, persistent inner voice that noticed precisely what others blissfully ignored. The winding path to the terrace took her past tables filled with Manhattan's finest citizens. Their booming laughter and idle, wealthy chatter seemed to fade away with each heavy step she took through the massive, floor-to-ceiling glass windows. The iconic city skyline sparkled brilliantly against the dark night sky. It was a breathtakingly beautiful view that now seemed to cruelly mock her rapidly growing unease. She heard them long before she actually saw them. Nathaniel's distinctive, arrogant laugh, mingled with a high-pitched, feminine giggle, made Isabelle's hand tremble violently as she pushed open the heavy glass door. The cool, crisp night air carried the heady, sweet scent of gardenias from the hotel's meticulously maintained grounds, a sickeningly sweet fragrance that would forever, permanently remind her of this exact, world-shattering moment. There, hiding in the dark shadow of a decorative floral trellis, stood her husband of 5 years. His arms were wrapped intimately and fiercely around a younger woman in a deep, plunging burgundy dress. Isabelle recognized her immediately. It was Cassandra Blake, the sharp new financial analyst Nathaniel had personally hired just 3 months ago. This was the exact same woman who had cheerfully brought expensive coffee to their house just last weekend. Smiling so sweetly at Isabelle and politely complimenting her meticulously planted flower beds. Nathaniel, her voice came out surprisingly steadier than she felt inside. He turned around slowly, showing absolutely no surprise, no guilt, and no shame. There was only a flash of mild, arrogant irritation at being interrupted. Cassandra took a quick step back, but remained defiantly close, her hand still resting on Nathaniel's tuxedo arm with a sickeningly familiar ease. Isabelle, his voice carried that dangerous, lethal calm she knew all too well. You're embarrassing yourself. Go back inside. How long? The desperate words escaped her lips before she could stop them. Deep inside her, Their unborn child stirred faintly, almost as if sensing the electric, terrifying tension thick in the air. "Don't start this drama here," he warned, his strong jaw tightening violently, his cold blue eyes turning to absolute ice. "I deserve to know." Isabelle took a bold step forward, drawing on a well of strength from somewhere incredibly deep within her soul. "How long have you been lying to me?" By now, a small, curious crowd of wealthy guests had started to gather near the open terrace doors. The soft, undeniable clicks of smartphone cameras broke the night's silence as people began to record the spectacle. Nathaniel's carefully maintained corporate facade finally cracked, fully revealing the ugly, boiling fury hiding just beneath the surface. "You really want the truth?" He moved aggressively toward her, towering threateningly over her much smaller frame. "Fine. Cassandra actually understands what a man in my high position needs. She doesn't constantly question every single decision I make. She doesn't play the pathetic, martyred wife. And let me be clear, she's not the first one, either. Does that finally satisfy your endless curiosity?" The vicious words struck her body exactly like physical blows. Isabelle's hand instinctively flew to her stomach, desperately protecting their innocent child from the brunt of his verbal assault. "I'm carrying your baby," she whispered, her voice cracking with raw heartbreak. The violent slap came completely without warning. The sickening crack of his heavy palm striking against her delicate cheek echoed loudly across the stone terrace, immediately followed by loud gasps of horror and shock from the onlookers, and the frantic, rapid clicking of dozens more phone cameras. Isabelle stumbled backward from the sheer force of the impact, her hand flying to her stinging face as hot, blinding tears blurred her vision. "You brought this entirely on yourself," Nathaniel snarled like a cornered animal, his public composure now fully and permanently shattered. "Always pushing me, always prying into my business. You are absolutely nothing without me, Isabelle. You are nothing." In that exact, horrifying moment, standing under the glittering Manhattan sky, with dozens of silent witnesses and their glowing phones capturing her ultimate humiliation, something fundamental inside Isabelle Calderon permanently changed. Years of playing the role of the quiet, submissive, highly observant wife instantly crystallized into an unbreakable core of steel determination. Without uttering a single word in response, she turned on her heel and walked away. Her steps were incredibly measured, dignified, and deliberate. Despite her violently trembling legs, she made it all the way down to the lobby and out to a waiting taxi before the heavy tears finally came in earnest. With shaking, frantic fingers, she pulled out her phone and dialed the one number she knew by heart. "Daddy," her voice cracked into a sob the second he answered. "I need you and Mom. Please come to New York right now." She drew a ragged, shuddering breath. Absolutely everything is falling apart. The guest bedroom of Isabelle's closest friend's apartment felt like a fragile temporary sanctuary in the harsh, unforgiving morning light. She sat frozen at the very edge of the bed, still wearing the wrinkled silk pajamas she'd put on the night before, the only thing she'd managed to grab in a duffel bag before fleeing the Greenwich estate at dawn. Her phone lay completely silent beside her. On the mattress, though the bright screen periodically lit up with hundreds of new, frantic notifications, she couldn't bring herself to open a single one of them. The terrible video had gone massively viral overnight. Greenwich scandal was currently the #1 trending topic locally, with grainy, shocking clips of Nathaniel's brutal assault being replayed endlessly across every single New York morning news broadcast. Isabelle's hand drifted unconsciously to her bruised cheek. The hot sting of last night still lingered on her skin, serving as a cruel, physical reminder that this wasn't just a bad nightmare she could eventually wake up from. "Your parents' flight lands in about an hour," said Molina Cooper, appearing warmly in the bedroom doorway, holding 2 steaming ceramic mugs. Her fiercely loyal college roommate had thrown open her apartment door at 5 in the morning, without a single second of hesitation, when Isabelle had shown up shivering, with mascara-streaked cheeks and heavily swollen eyes. "I can easily drive you to the airport to get them if you'd like." Isabelle gratefully accepted the fragrant chamomile tea, tightly wrapping her freezing fingers around the warm, soothing ceramic. "I really should go alone," she murmured, looking down. They don't even know about the baby yet." The morning news droned on softly from the television in the kitchen. The anchor's polished, serious voice carrying faintly up the short flight of stairs. "Sources close to the family say Nathaniel Everett, the billionaire CEO of Everett Holdings, has absolutely not returned to the Greenwich residence since last night's shocking incident at the Whitmore Hotel. Company shares have already dropped 3 points in pre-market trading." "Turn it off, please," Isabelle called out, her voice trembling. Molina disappeared briefly into the kitchen, and a blessed, heavy silence finally settled over the small apartment. When she returned, she sat down gently beside Isabelle on the edge of the bed. "The police called my phone for you again," Molina said very gently, treading carefully. "They really want to know if you're officially pressing assault charges against him." "I just can't even think about that right now." Isabelle's hand drifted down to her stomach, a highly protective gesture that had become second nature ever since the day she learned she was pregnant. "I just desperately need my parents." Her phone buzzed loudly again. Nathaniel's name flashed aggressively on the bright screen, immediately followed by 3 missed calls from his overbearing mother, Margaret. The notifications stared back at her exactly like harsh accusations. The ruthless Everett family damage control had already begun. Of course, she could so easily and vividly picture her terrifying mother-in-law sitting in her study, aggressively dialing contact after contact, spinning a false narrative, and doing absolutely whatever dark deeds were needed to preserve the pristine Everett name. "You really should eat something," Melina urged softly, touching her arm. Do it. For the baby. The mere mention of food made Isabelle's stomach lurch with nausea. But she nodded anyway. Her dear friend was right. She forced herself to take a few slow, deliberate sips of the hot tea, painfully remembering the expensive bottle of prenatal vitamins still sitting untouched on her massive marble bathroom counter. Back at home. Home. The very word felt incredibly foreign and hollow to her now. I just keep obsessively thinking about all the glaring signs I missed, Isabelle said quietly, staring deeply into the amber liquid in her mug. The endless late meetings. The supposed business trips that magically kept getting longer and longer. The highly specific way he always made absolutely sure he was standing physically between me and his cell phone. A very bitter, hollow laugh escaped her lips. I'm supposed to be the highly observant one, right? The one who notices absolutely everything. But I just didn't want to see it. I chose to be blind. Melina gently reached out and squeezed her cold hand. You saw exactly what you desperately hoped was there. Izzy, we all do that sometimes when we love someone. The long morning crept forward with an agonizing, molasses-like slowness. Isabelle took a long, hot shower in Melina's cramped bathroom. Eventually, borrowing clean, simple clothes that didn't quite fit her slender frame. Every single physical movement she made felt incredibly mechanical, exactly as if she were somehow remotely piloting her own body from a very great distance. The absolute only thing in the world that felt truly real to her was the incredibly subtle, beautiful flutter in her lower stomach. Her sweet baby remained blissfully, perfectly unaware that their entire world had just violently imploded. At exactly 10:15 a.m., Isabelle stood nervously in the bustling arrivals area of John F. Kennedy International Airport, her anxious eyes desperately scanning the massive, moving crowd for familiar faces. Her father's text had been reassuringly brief. Terminal 5. Almost there, sweetheart. She spotted them in the distance before they even saw her. Joseph Calderon's tall, strong, weathered figure was moving purposefully and rapidly through the dense crowd, his large hands tightly clutching both of their carry-on bags. Right beside him, Martha's much shorter frame hurried frantically to keep his rapid pace, her worried eyes anxiously sweeping the vast terminal. They looked exactly as they had last Christmas, her dad in his favorite, faded flannel shirt and sturdy jeans, her mom in her familiar, comforting floral cardigan. But something profound about seeing them standing here, so incredibly real and solid, amidst her nightmare, made Isabelle's carefully maintained, fragile composure finally begin to crack in half. Mom, she choked out a sob as they finally reached her. Daddy. Martha's warm, soft arms were tightly around her in an absolute instant, pulling her daughter fiercely close to her chest. Isabelle deeply inhaled her mother's incredibly familiar scent, a soothing mix of dried lavender and the feeling of home and finally allowed herself to completely break down and weep. Joseph's massive, strong hand found her shaking shoulder, feeling impossibly steady and fiercely protective. "I'm right here, baby," Martha whispered through her own tears, gently stroking Isabelle's hair exactly like she had when Isabelle was just a frightened little girl. "We're both right here with you. I have so much to tell you both," Isabelle managed to gasp out between her heavy sobs, pulling back just slightly. I'm pregnant." She physically felt her mother's sharp, shocked intake of breath, and she clearly saw her father's large hand violently tighten around the plastic luggage handle until his knuckles turned pure white. But neither of them let go of her for a second. Instead, Joseph took a bold step forward, wrapping his massive arms entirely around both his crying wife and his shattered daughter, effectively creating a quiet, impenetrable physical shelter amid the staring strangers and whispered conversations surrounding them in the busy terminal. "Let's get you out of here right now," he said softly. His deep, rumbling voice was incredibly steady, even though Isabelle could distinctly feel the raw, burning emotion trembling through his tight embrace. "We're gonna figure absolutely everything out together as a family." As they walked slowly together toward the concrete parking garage, Isabelle moved safely between her parents exactly like a small child being gently, lovingly shepherded back home. And for the very first time since the horrific events of the night before, she felt something highly unfamiliar but absolutely unmistakable blooming in her chest. Hope. It was incredibly small and highly fragile, barely a flickering spark, but it was there. Molina's small guest room had officially become a bustling, temporary sanctuary for the Calderon family. Martha immediately busied herself in the borrowed kitchen, the highly comforting, rhythmic ritual of boiling water and making tea, helping to create a tiny sliver of normalcy in their violently upended world. The soft, familiar clink of metal spoons against ceramic mugs and the high-pitched whistle of the tea kettle filled the tense, heavy silence of the apartment. "You really need to eat something substantial today," Martha fretted like a mother hen, gently setting a warm plate of buttered toast directly beside Isabelle, who currently sat curled up tightly into a ball in an oversized, faded armchair. "The baby absolutely needs proper nourishment to grow." Joseph stood silently like a sentinel by the living room window. His tall, broad frame cast a very long, dark shadow entirely across the room. He had been mostly broodingly quiet ever since their arrival from the airport, but Isabelle deeply recognized the fiercely protective way her father stood guarding the window. It was the exact same way he used to physically position himself during terrifying thunderstorms when she was just a little girl, standing there exactly as if he firmly believed he could physically block the lightning strikes from hitting her with his presence alone. "Have you formally spoken to a lawyer yet?" he finally asked, turning around. His deep voice carried that incredibly careful, measured tone she knew so well. When he was suppressing rage, Isabelle nodded slowly, pulling her borrowed oversized sweater much tighter. Around her trembling shoulders, Molina highly recommended someone very aggressive. Catherine Walsh. She specifically specializes in high-profile cases. Exactly like mine. The heavy words felt incredibly strange and bitter in her mouth. A case was that all her entire life and marriage was reduced to now. Good, Joseph said, nodding firmly once before falling completely silent again. Though Isabelle noticed his strong jaw shifted and ground slightly, exactly as if he were violently wrestling with violent thoughts about Nathaniel that he absolutely hadn't spoken aloud. Martha returned from the kitchen carrying 3 steaming mugs of her famous humiliated, which had been her steadfast answer to absolutely every family crisis for as long as Isabelle could possibly remember. Absolutely nothing heals the soul quite like a good hot cup of tea, she said softly, settling gracefully into the chair directly across from Isabelle. The late afternoon light perfectly caught her mother's gray curls, and Isabelle suddenly, painfully, noticed there was significantly more silver in her hair than she remembered seeing at Christmas. I really should have seen all of this coming, Isabelle murmured sadly, staring blankly into the swirling liquid in her mug. There were so incredibly many signs right in front of me. The endless late meetings, the supposed business trips that mysteriously kept getting longer and longer, the terrifying way he'd suddenly get violently angry over the absolute smallest, most insignificant things, a slightly misplaced television remote, or dinner being served 5 minutes late. She swallowed hard, a lump forming in her throat. I just kept making endless, pathetic excuses for his behavior. Martha's hands trembled very slightly as she set her warm mug down on the coffee table. Sweetheart, she began, her voice shaking. Then she paused, glancing nervously up toward Joseph. Something incredibly profound and entirely unspoken passed silently between her parents in that moment, a deep, complex look forged over decades of a strong, loving marriage. Isabelle, Martha continued, her voice growing significantly steadier now. There is something very important I need to tell you today. Something I really should have told you a very long time ago. She nervously twisted the simple, elegant gold wedding band on her ring finger. A familiar nervous habit Isabelle had seen her do 1,000 times growing up, but had never once thought to question. Joseph moved slowly from his protective post by the window and sat down gently on the arm of Martha's chair. His large hand found her shoulder, offering his wife quiet, unwavering support. Long before I ever met your wonderful father, Martha said, looking directly into Isabelle's eyes, I was actually married to someone else. His name was William. She took a deep, highly shaky breath, bracing herself against the painful memories. He was exactly like Nathaniel. He was incredibly charming and beloved in public, but absolutely cruel and monstrous in private. He was the exact kind of manipulative man who could easily make you question your own sanity and your own mind. Isabelle sat up much straighter in her armchair, her chamomile tea completely forgotten. In 31 years of life on this earth, she had absolutely never, ever heard this dark story about her mother. It all started very small, Martha went on, her eyes glossing over. Just little, cutting comments about my physical appearance, or harsh critiques of my cooking. Then, the isolation began. He loudly proclaimed he didn't like any of my friends, so they stopped calling. He constantly said my family was far too interfering, so I stopped visiting them. Before I even knew what was happening, I was completely and utterly alone in the world. Her eyes grew distant and haunted. When he finally raised his hand and hit me for the first time, I had already completely forgotten who the strong girl I used to be was. "Mom," Isabelle whispered, tears springing to her eyes. "I finally left him early on a Tuesday morning," Martha whispered, reaching across the space to tightly grab her daughter's hand. "I frantically packed a single, small suitcase while he was away at work, and I just completely disappeared into thin air." Her eyes grew distant with the terrifying memory of her flight. I was absolutely terrified every single day. I spent 6 agonizing months living on a couch with my sister in Cincinnati, literally jumping in terror at every single shadow. She paused, a small, beautiful, watery smile finally breaking through the pain. "That is exactly where I met your father." Joseph's thumb moved in very slow, incredibly comforting circles on Martha's tense shoulder. "I hired her as my front office assistant," he said softly, looking down at his wife with immense adoration. She was hiding and using her maiden name. She strictly kept to herself, but she had this incredible, magical way of making absolutely everyone around her feel deeply seen. She was always leaving hot coffee on people's desks and remembering the specific names of all their kids. Martha looked up at her husband with a soft, glowing smile of pure love. "Your father was the very first man in the world who ever made me feel completely safe. Again, he was the one who patiently reminded my broken heart that true love absolutely shouldn't ever hurt you." Then, she turned her fierce gaze back to Isabelle. "I never told you this dark history because I desperately wanted to protect you from all of that ugliness. I wanted to protect you from knowing exactly what I had been through. Maybe if I had warned you." "No, Mom," Isabelle's voice cut through the air, speaking gently but incredibly firmly, hot tears still welling in her eyes. "This absolutely isn't your fault. None of what happened to me is your fault." Martha rose from her chair and knelt gracefully beside Isabelle's armchair, taking both of her daughter's hands firmly in her own. "Listen to me very closely, sweetheart. You are significantly stronger than you even know right now. And that beautiful baby," she placed one warm, loving hand incredibly gently over Isabelle's stomach. "That baby is going to be raised by a mother who proudly shows them that sometimes the absolute bravest thing a person can possibly do in life is to completely start over." Joseph loudly cleared his throat, his usual stoic directness heavily roughened by his own deep emotion. We're going to need to go back to that house tomorrow morning. We will get all of your important things before he comes back from wherever the hell he's currently hiding. Isabelle nodded slowly, fiercely squeezing her mother's hands for strength. I've actually been thinking a lot about that today. About exactly what to take with me, and exactly what to permanently leave behind. She actually managed a very small, highly determined smile. The quiet one in the room notices absolutely everything. Remember? I know exactly where all of his highly sensitive, important papers are kept. I know where the encrypted backup drives are hidden. I know the location of all the secret financial records. That's my brilliant girl, Joseph said softly. Immense. Fierce pride, absolutely. Unmistakable in his deep voice. As the late afternoon light slowly faded into dusk, they sat together quietly in Molina's borrowed, cozy living room. There were three distinct generations, deeply bound together by profound love and fierce survival instincts. Outside, the window, New York's loud, relentless rhythm pulsed onward, uncaring. But in here, time moved exactly like Martha's cooling chamomile tea, slow, incredibly gentle, and profoundly healing. The security code to the front gate actually still worked. Isabelle's fingers trembled very slightly as she punched in the highly familiar sequence of numbers at the towering iron gate of the massive Greenwich estate. Joseph's unassuming rental car rolled incredibly slowly up the long, crunching gravel drive. The sprawling, multi-million-dollar house loomed ominously ahead of them. It was once a Georgian-style architectural dream come true. Now, it was nothing more than a chilling, terrifying reminder of something entirely different and ugly. He's definitely not here, Isabelle said with a sigh of relief. Immediately, noticing the glaring absence of Nathaniel's custom black Range Rover in the circular driveway. His mother haughtily called Molina's phone late last night, she added, her voice heavily tinged with sharp bitterness. She claimed he's taking some necessary time to mentally process the stress. He's hiding like a coward at their luxury lake house upstate. Martha reached forward from the back seat and gently, reassuringly squeezed her daughter's shoulder. Let's be incredibly quick about this. Then, get in. And get out. Once inside the massive house, they moved with an eerie, quiet efficiency. Isabelle had spent the entirety of the previous sleepless night meticulously making mental lists. Her natural, highly analytical organizing skills were completely taking over, keeping her focused even in the very midst of total emotional upheaval, turning her mind entirely to this new, painful, but highly necessary task. Isabelle moved rapidly through the sprawling house with a quiet, lethal purpose. She grabbed highly sensitive, confidential documents from the hidden safe in the home office. She retrieved her personal, heirloom jewelry from the master bedroom's wall safe. She aggressively yanked multiple encrypted external hard drives directly from Nathaniel's locked desk drawer. Finally, she swept the expensive prenatal vitamins off the marble bathroom counter into her bag. Each and every item was methodically listed in her brain, located and secured. Joseph strategically positioned himself, standing by the large front bay windows, acting exactly like a sentry keeping watch while the mother and daughter worked. Rapidly, his imposing physical presence felt exactly like a titanium shield too. Isabelle solid, utterly dependable, and fiercely protective. "The safe combination is actually my birthday," Isabelle said flatly, feeling a wave of disgust as she knelt on the carpet in front of the master bedroom wall. Safe. He always arrogantly said he'd never forget the code that way. The heavy steel door swung open smoothly, revealing tidy, velvet-lined rows of expensive jewelry boxes and neatly stacked, highly confidential corporate documents. Martha held open a large, sturdy canvas tote bag as Isabelle quickly began emptying the safe's contents with a practiced, icy calm. Her massive diamond engagement ring, a flawless 3-carat stone that had absolutely always felt far too ostentatious and heavy on her finger, went into the bag last. She paused, staring down at the glittering diamond for a long, heavy moment. "Did you end up keeping yours?" she asked her mother very quietly, not looking up. "From before you met Dad?" "No," Martha answered incredibly softly, her eyes full of understanding. "I proudly sold it to a pawn shop to pay for my divorce lawyer." She gently touched Isabelle's trembling shoulder. Each and every survivor's story is entirely different, sweetheart. You do exactly what feels right for your own healing. Downstairs in Nathaniel's sprawling, mahogany-paneled home office, Isabelle moved with total, silent precision. 5 long years of playing the role of the perfectly observant, quiet wife had expertly taught her the exact, hidden layout of every single desk drawer, every locked file cabinet, and every digital password. She rapidly gathered all the encrypted external hard drives, a handful of hidden USB sticks, and a thick, red folder of highly sensitive financial documents she had very carefully and secretly copied over the past year. She placed them all securely into the padded compartment of her laptop bag. "Smart girl," Joseph murmured approvingly, watching her swift actions from the office doorway. "I always notice things," Isabelle replied, her fingers flying expertly across Nathaniel's expensive computer keyboard, bypassing his security. "I noticed every single time he'd violently slam his laptop shut the second I walked into a room. I noticed the highly secretive, paranoid way he'd always take calls pacing in the back garden so I couldn't hear. I started quietly preparing these files months ago, just in case my worst fears were true." She rapidly transferred the absolute last of the digital files she knew she needed, then very carefully, meticulously reset his computer and the desk to look entirely untouched, exactly as she had found it. The cavernous master bedroom was undoubtedly the absolute hardest room to face. The massive king-sized bed was actually still unmade from 2 mornings ago, the very last time she'd peacefully slept there, completely and blissfully unaware that her entire life was a lie. Her expensive designer clothes hung in perfect, neat rows in the sprawling walk-in closet, obsessively color-coded and highly organized by season. It was a perfectly curated, highly expensive lifestyle, crafted with meticulous care over years, now brutally exposed as nothing more than a beautiful, gilded prison. Only take what you absolutely, practically need to survive, Martha advised. Wisely, holding open a large, rolling suitcase on the bed. Take comfortable clothes for the changing weather, your intimate personal items, and let the rest go. She gestured gently around the opulent room. All the rest of this is just meaningless things. Isabelle nodded slowly, selecting specific pieces with a quiet, clinical method. She packed comfortable, stretchy clothing to accommodate her changing, pregnant body, a few deeply cherished, framed photos from her specific side of the dresser, and the incredibly soft, hand-knitted baby blanket her late grandmother had lovingly made for her before passing away. She had secretly planned to use that very blanket for a special, joyful pregnancy announcement to Nathaniel, an announcement that would obviously never come now. Down in the massive, gourmet kitchen, she paused briefly before the stainless steel refrigerator. Dozens of happy photos and expensive souvenir magnets completely covered its gleaming surface. One specific photo instantly caught her tearful eye. It had been taken at last year's lavish corporate Christmas party, months before she even knew she was pregnant. She and Nathaniel physically looked absolutely perfect in it. His arm was wrapped tightly around her small waist, both of them flashing brilliant, camera-ready smiles. But, looking at it now, with clear eyes, she finally saw exactly what the camera had truly captured. She saw the slight, rigid tension in her own shoulders. She saw the highly telling way she physically leaned, almost imperceptibly, away from his controlling grip. Joseph appeared completely silently right beside her. He reached up with his large hand, gently removed the photograph from beneath the magnet, and slid it smoothly into a manila folder. Evidence, he said simply, his voice a low rumble. That bulldog lawyer, Catherine Walsh, might very well need it to show his controlling nature. They worked incredibly steadily and efficiently for 2 full hours, moving exactly like silent ghosts through the massive house that had been Isabelle's gilded cage for 5 years. Room by room, they systematically gathered the important fragments of her life, securing the specific pieces she wanted to keep, and permanently leaving behind the carefully curated, fake facade she had built as Nathaniel Everett's perfect trophy wife. As they finally packed the very last duffel bag into the trunk of Joseph's rental car, Isabelle's phone vibrated aggressively in her pocket. It was a highly unexpected text message from Cassandra. Of all people, we desperately need to talk about his hidden offshore accounts. Isabelle stared down at the shocking message, her heart pounding frantically against her ribs. The quiet one notices absolutely everything, she reminded herself fiercely. She remembered the highly suspicious, multi-million-dollar wire transfers she'd carefully and secretly documented over the past year. "Are you ready?" Joseph asked gently from the driver's seat, the engine purring. To life. Isabelle took one absolute last, sweeping look at the grand house through the tinted car windows. She looked at the massive kitchen where she'd flawlessly hosted endless, stressful dinner parties, the opulent living room where she'd sat completely silently through Nathaniel's terrifying, volatile outbursts, the grand, sweeping staircase she had slowly climbed night after night, feeling incredibly small and utterly alone. "Yes," she said firmly, sliding smoothly into the leather passenger seat. "I am completely ready." She didn't look back as the car drove away. Instead, she immediately forwarded Cassandra's cryptic message directly to Catherine Walsh. The quiet one was absolutely, permanently done being silent. Catherine Walsh's Midtown law office was a remarkably stark contrast to the lavish, over-the-top Everett Holdings corporate headquarters, where Isabelle had spent so many exhausting hours helping organize massive charity galas. Catherine's walls were painted a highly professional, muted gray, lined extensively with prestigious Ivy League diplomas and formidable legal certifications, rather than flashy, expensive modern art intended to intimidate. Catherine herself was exactly like her office space, highly practical, intensely focused, and refreshingly, brutally direct. "Cassandra Blake's text message is an absolute game-changer for us," Catherine said, her sharp eyes rapidly reviewing the massive stacks of financial documents spread across her large mahogany desk. Isabelle sat perfectly positioned between her parents, her back ramrod straight, her hands folded highly protectively over her small but growing baby bump. "She is incredibly scared of going down with the ship. And quite frankly, she absolutely should be," Catherine continued, tapping a manicured finger on a spreadsheet. "The extensive financial records you've brilliantly gathered here strongly suggest a massive, long-term pattern of systematic corporate fraud." Joseph leaned his large frame in slightly closer to the desk. "What exactly are we looking at here, counselor?" Catherine pulled a thick, red file from the center of the stack. "Based entirely on Isabelle's excellent documentation, Nathaniel has been actively funneling highly substantial sums of corporate and investor money through a complex, illegal series of shell companies based overseas. Cassandra's personal signature actually appears on several of these massive transactions as an official witness, or a secondary corporate authorizer. So, she's legally implicated herself deeply in his crimes," Catherine added, a predatory gleam in her eye. "I distinctly noticed the strange transfers starting early last spring," Isabelle said quietly, piecing the timeline together. "They were relatively small amounts at first, to test the waters, but then they grew exponentially larger. The transfers were almost always initiated on Friday afternoons. Exactly when he thought I was safely out of the house at my yoga classes." She paused, painfully remembering the terrifying, quiet hours she'd actually spent locked Inside his home office, instead of at the yoga studio, meticulously photographing his private documents with violently trembling hands, Martha reached over the armrest and gently, proudly squeezed her daughter's hand. "You were so incredibly brave to do that, sweetheart." "You were highly strategic and smart," Catherine corrected her, her professional tone brimming with deep approval. "Most wealthy clients come into this office with nothing but vague suspicions and absolutely zero hard proof. But you've literally handed me a solid concrete foundation to completely build an airtight federal case on." She typed rapidly at her computer keyboard, bringing up more encrypted files. "And as for the viral video of the physical assault," Catherine continued, looking up at them, "it has actually helped our legal position immensely. Public sentiment and sympathy is overwhelmingly, globally on your side right now. And Nathaniel's highly public, violent behavior has made several of his key corporate board members incredibly nervous. They are deeply, legally worried about their own corporate liability and stock prices dropping." Isabelle bit the soft inside of her cheek. It was a nervous gesture Catherine had already come to quickly recognize in her client. It always meant Isabelle was actively processing highly difficult, emotional information. "His mother, Margaret, called my phone again this morning," Isabelle said. Quietly, her voice tight, she aggressively screamed that I am purposefully destroying their pristine family name. She said that I should strongly think about my unborn child's future before I ruin the company. "That is classic, textbook narcissistic manipulation," Catherine replied firmly, waving a dismissive hand. "Your innocent child's bright future is exactly what you are aggressively protecting by handling this situation the right way." She pulled out another thick legal folder. "Now, let's talk about the prenuptial agreement you signed." He smoothly said it was just standard corporate procedure, Isabelle murmured, looking down in shame. "I didn't even bother to show it to an independent lawyer before signing. I was just so deeply in love with him," Martha finished softly, completely understanding her daughter's naive mistake. "You were in love," Catherine echoed, nodding with genuine, human understanding. But she immediately pressed on, shifting back to lawyer mode. "The incredibly good news for us is that there are several major legal clauses in this document that we can aggressively and successfully challenge in court, especially given the highly documented physical abuse and the massive corporate financial misconduct." She tapped the thick agreement with her pen. "More importantly, this sloppy document absolutely does not account for the existence of any children." Catherine looked directly and intensely at Isabelle. "Your baby legally changes absolutely everything about this settlement." A sharp knock at the heavy office door interrupted their intense strategy session. Catherine's paralegal assistant stepped quickly into the room, holding a fresh, printed stack of legal papers. "Cassandra Blake's defense attorney just called the main line," the assistant announced breathlessly. "She desperately wants to make a deal with us." The entire room fell into a stunned, heavy silence. Isabelle closed her eyes, vividly recalling Cassandra's smug, painted face from that terrible night on the terrace at the gala. She remembered the exact, cold way the other woman had just stood there, silently watching Nathaniel violently lash out and strike her, without even attempting to step in or help. What specific kind of deal is she looking for? Joseph asked, his deep voice heavily edged with fierce, paternal protectiveness. She is officially offering to fully testify under oath about all the financial irregularities and offshore accounts, the assistant explained quickly. In exchange, she wants total immunity from our civil prosecution and any federal reporting. Catherine slowly turned her chair to face Isabelle. This is entirely your decision to make as the client. Cassandra's insider testimony could be absolutely crucial to permanently destroying his empire. But I completely understand if the thought of actively working with her feels emotionally impossible for you right now. Isabelle opened her eyes slowly and sat up much straighter in her leather chair. The quiet one notices absolutely everything, she said softly in her mind, speaking more to herself than to the others in the room. She thought of the little details, like the highly terrified way Cassandra physically flinched whenever Nathaniel raised his booming voice in the corporate office. How she would frantically, compulsively check her cell phone, looking for his approval. After every single meeting with him, she turned her gaze back to Catherine. She is really just another one of his victims, isn't she? Just manipulated and used very differently than I was. That is highly possible, Catherine said very carefully, acting as the voice of legal reason. But that absolutely does not mean you are morally obligated to help save her from prison. Isabelle thought deeply of her mother's harrowing survival story, the immense strength it had truly taken for Martha to start her entire life over from nothing. Please tell her defense attorney that we will seriously consider her offer, Isabelle said, her voice growing noticeably firmer and more authoritative. But we absolutely require total, full disclosure from her. I want every single document, every illegal transaction, and transcripts of every secret conversation. She absolutely does not get to hide anything else from me. Catherine made a quick, approving note on her legal pad, the deep professional respect in her expression abundantly clear. I will personally schedule a secure meeting with her counsel for next week. She then pulled a sleek business card from her desk drawer and handed it over. This is the direct number of an excellent, highly discreet realtor I work with. She specializes in quietly helping high-profile clients in sensitive situations exactly like yours. The secure apartment building you mentioned in Midtown sounds like an absolutely perfect place for your fresh start. As they gathered their bags and coats to leave, Catherine held Isabelle back in the office for just a moment. Just one more important thing you need to know. The Everett family's massive PR team officially released a public statement to the press early this morning. They are aggressively pushing a highly offensive mental health narrative to the tabloids, heavily implying that wild pregnancy hormones made you completely unstable and hysterical that night. Isabelle saw her mother instantly stiffen in rage beside her. and clearly saw. Her father's large hands curl into tight, white-knuckled fists ready for violence. "Let them spin their lies," Isabelle said calmly, genuinely surprising even herself with the total, icy calm in her voice. "The quiet one in the room has absolutely all of the receipts." Walking confidently out of Catherine's high-rise office and stepping into the bright, bustling New York afternoon sun, Isabelle felt something massive, physically shifting deep inside her chest. It wasn't just the baby kicking and moving, it was something vastly deeper and more profound in her very spirit. The quiet, observant woman was finally finding her true, powerful voice, and she realized she had volumes of truth to finally say. The cozy, light-filled midtown apartment physically felt absolutely nothing like the dark, sprawling Greenwich estate, and that was exactly what Isabelle desperately needed for her soul. Bright, warm sunlight streamed beautifully through the large, bare windows, landing on the gleaming hardwood floors and casting warm, golden patches that made the small, empty space feel entirely full of infinite possibility. Now, exactly 4 months pregnant, she stood quietly in the center of what would soon become the baby's nursery, mentally and happily arranging wooden crib furniture that hadn't even been purchased yet. This particular building has absolutely top-tier security, the realtor, Lisa Bennett, said cheerfully as she checked off a list of items on her digital tablet. "We offer 24-hour armed desk staff, highly secured underground parking, high-def cameras in all common areas, and it is conveniently only a 15-minute commute from your new office job." Isabelle nodded in satisfaction, gently running her hand along the freshly painted, pristine white wall. The entire apartment was honestly smaller than her former massive walk-in closet back at the estate, but to her, it felt exactly like absolute, pure freedom. Her supportive parents had lovingly and firmly insisted on fully covering the hefty security deposit and the first 3 months of rent, generously giving her the safe financial space she needed to properly rebuild her life. "The lease agreement is completely ready to sign whenever you are," Lisa said, gently, offering a kind smile. She had handled more than enough sensitive, high-profile divorce cases like this to intimately know exactly when to push a client and when to patiently wait. "I'll take it right now," Isabelle replied, her voice surprisingly firm and full of joy. An hour later, she proudly held the shiny brass keys in her hand, with an official move-in date firmly set for the following week. As Lisa cheerfully left the apartment with the signed paperwork, Martha immediately emerged from the small kitchen, where she had been busily testing the water pressure in the faucets and strictly inspecting all the cabinet hinges for flaws. "The water pressure is incredibly good," she reported seriously, using the exact same grave tone she might have used to deliver breaking news of a massive medical breakthrough. "And there is a truly lovely, quiet little coffee shop located just around the corner. It will be absolutely perfect for those tough mornings when you desperately need a little extra comfort." Isabelle smiled warmly, deeply recognizing her sweet mother's loving attempt to try and make everything in this chaotic situation feel perfectly normal. Mom, you really don't have to pretend that this tiny place is what you ever wanted. For my life. Martha's worried expression instantly softened into pure maternal love. What I desperately want in this world is for you to be completely safe and genuinely happy. And this, she gestured expansively around the empty, sunlit apartment. This beautiful place is a massive step toward achieving both of those things. Joseph suddenly appeared in the doorway, having just finished his own rigorous military-style inspection of the building's entire security camera systems. The front desk guard seems incredibly sharp. He's former military. I just spoke with him at length about the strict protocols regarding any unwanted visitors from the Everett family. Dad, Isabelle started to protest with a smile. I'm just being thoroughly protective. Sweetheart, he said, pulling his cell phone out of his pocket. Your mother and I have been talking it over privately. We would really like to stay here in New York for a while longer. Just to help you properly get settled in. Isabelle physically felt hot tears press urgently at the back of her eyes. Damn. These pregnancy hormones, she thought. But she forcefully pushed the tears back. You both have your own busy lives back home in Connecticut. You have jobs to go to. We have you, Martha said incredibly firmly, leaving no room for argument. Your father can easily manage his consulting business remotely for a few weeks. And my silly neighborhood garden club will absolutely survive without my presence. A loud text notification abruptly interrupted the tender family moment. It was from Cassandra's defense attorney again. Client is fully willing to provide absolute, full documentation of the fraud. We request a highly secure meeting at a neutral location tomorrow. Isabelle quietly showed the glowing message to her parents. Joseph's strong jaw tightened in anger at the sight of the woman's name, but he didn't say a single word. He wisely let his daughter process the information and make the tactical decision entirely herself. I will have Catherine arrange the meeting at her law office, Isabelle said. Finally, her tone absolute steel. There will be absolutely no more secret meetings, and absolutely no more hidden corporate agendas. Later that same afternoon, Isabelle sat peacefully in the small, charming cafe her mother had just discovered, sipping warm decaf tea and opening her sleek laptop. The brand new job she had just accepted, working as an administrative assistant at a highly respected, family-owned construction company, was set to officially begin next Monday. The starting salary was a mere tiny fraction of the massive allowance she had been used to having, but it proudly came with solid health insurance and, vastly more importantly, absolutely no complicated, toxic strings attached to it. Her phone buzzed loudly again. Another message. This one was a frantic text from Molina. There is a massive news crew currently camped outside the Greenwich house. His evil mother is aggressively giving live TV interviews about her deep concerns for your declining mental health. Isabelle slowly closed her eyes, breathing deeply in and out, exactly the calming way her father had taught her as a child. Let them frantically spin their fake stories to the press, she thought. The quiet one has absolutely all of the hard facts on her side. Opening her encrypted email, she found a highly secure message from Catherine. Attached were several massive legal documents for her final review. The brilliant lawyer had already formally begun the aggressive legal process of challenging the airtight prenuptial agreement in court, specifically citing the highly documented physical abuse and massive financial misconduct. There was also a comprehensive draft of a strict restraining order completely ready for Isabelle's final approval. As she carefully read through the dense, complex legal language, a dark memory suddenly surfaced in her mind, Nathaniel, cruelly laughing at her highly methodical habits, mockingly calling her obsessive and paranoid for keeping such highly detailed household records. You really need to learn how to just relax and have a drink, darling, he'd say with a smirk, usually right before doing something shady that absolutely warranted her careful documentation. The baby suddenly moved inside her, a gentle, profound flutter that still beautifully caught her off guard every single time it happened. We're going to be absolutely, perfectly okay, she whispered softly to the empty cafe, placing one warm hand lovingly on her growing bump. The quiet one is making absolutely sure of that. Her phone screen suddenly lit up again, this time flashing with a highly urgent message from a completely unknown Washington, D.C. number. Mrs. Everett, this is Senior Investigator Robert Chun calling directly from the sick. We have recently received some highly concerning, credible information regarding massive fraud at Everett Holdings. Would you possibly be willing to speak with us off the record? Isabelle stared at the shocking message for a long, silent moment, a slow smile spreading across her face. She then quickly forwarded the text directly to Catherine. The quiet one's extremely careful, meticulous documentation was just about to make some incredibly serious noise in the financial world. Martha returned cheerfully to the cafe table carrying a tray with fresh, steaming tea and a pair of warm blueberry muffins, settling comfortably into the chair directly across from Isabelle. You've got that specific look on your face, she said, closely studying her daughter's glowing expression. It's the exact same determined one you used to get when you were a little girl and finally figured out a highly complex puzzle. I was just thinking, Isabelle replied brightly, confidently closing her laptop. Shut. About how, sometimes in life, the absolute quietest person sitting in the back of the room is the exact one you should have been terrified of and watching all along. The SEC's massive New York field office was deliberately, aggressively, forgettable in its design. The bland beige walls, the cheap, standard issue, corporate furniture, and the soft, annoying hum of the overhead fluorescent lights created a sterile environment meant to somehow put nervous people at ease, or perhaps to simply lull them into a highly false sense of total security. Isabelle sat confidently in one of the freezing conference rooms with the formidable Catherine Walsh sitting firmly at her side, directly facing Senior Investigator Robert Chin and two other intense, silent federal investigators. These massive financial transactions, Chin said slowly, sliding several printed documents across the cheap table, match up absolutely perfectly with the illicit patterns you so carefully documented for us. His professional tone carried a deep, quiet admiration. Most normal people absolutely don't ever think to meticulously photograph private bank statements, complete with digital timestamps. The quiet one in the house notices all the tiny details, Isabelle replied smoothly, her voice incredibly steady despite her rapidly racing heart. At a highly visible 5 months pregnant now, her beautiful maternal condition was incredibly obvious, even safely hidden beneath the loose, highly professional Navy outfit she had carefully chosen to wear for the federal meeting. My client has generously provided your office with highly extensive, irrefutable documentation of massively questionable, illegal financial activities occurring daily at Everett Holdings, Catherine interjected smoothly, taking control of the narrative. We are entirely prepared to cooperate fully and transparently with your federal investigation. Mrs. Everett, Robert Chin began formally, opening his notepad. Miss Calderon, Isabelle corrected him instantly, her voice quiet but carrying absolute steel. I have already legally filed the paperwork to permanently restore my maiden name. Chin nodded quickly, looking highly apologetic. Miss Calderon, of course. Cassandra Blake's recent sworn testimony perfectly corroborates your hard evidence. The massive offshore accounts, the dozens of illegal shell companies, the heavily manipulated corporate books. It's all clearly there in black and white. But we strongly believe this massive conspiracy goes significantly beyond just your ex-husband, Nathaniel Everett. Isabelle's hand instinctively flew to rest protectively on her stomach as the baby shifted restlessly within her. His mother, she said, her voice dropping. Margaret Everett has sat powerfully on the executive board for over 20 years. Tell them absolutely everything about the charity galas, Catherine prompted, gently, encouraging her client. Isabelle took a deep, fortifying breath, painfully recalling the countless, exhausting, overly elegant evenings she'd attended by Nathaniel's side, always quietly watching, intensely listening, and silently noticing everything. The prestigious Everett Family Foundation hosted 4 massive, high-profile fundraising events each and every year, she explained, looking directly at the agents. They were incredibly exclusive, highly publicized, and astronomically expensive. But the final financial numbers absolutely never quite made sense to me. I frequently handled some of the high donor invitation lists. I saw the actual donation records. She paused, carefully collecting her thoughts to ensure total accuracy. Wealthy people would frequently donate incredibly large sums of money, millions of dollars sometimes, but only a tiny, fractional amount of those actual funds ever showed up in the foundation's official Public tax. Disclosures. Chun rapidly made detailed notes on his legal pad. His facial expression remaining carefully, professionally neutral. So, you are implying massive money laundering? He asked directly. Among many other highly illegal things. Yes, Catherine confirmed fiercely. We have highly credible reason to believe the so-called charity foundation was actively and illegally used to entirely obscure both incoming dirty funds and outgoing bribes. The intense federal meeting continued relentlessly for 2 more exhausting hours. Isabelle moved through her massive mountain of evidence highly methodically, explaining spreadsheet after complex spreadsheet, presenting hundreds of photographed documents, and reciting highly detailed notes of specific dates and times from memory. Piece by damning piece, she beautifully built a terrifying criminal picture that made the seasoned SEC investigators lean forward over the table with vastly increasing intense focus. When they finally emerged from the imposing federal building into the sunlight, Catherine turned to Isabelle with a very rare, deeply approving smile on her face. Do you truly realize the magnitude of what you've just done in there? The SEC absolutely doesn't move this incredibly quickly unless they are 100% confident they can win. The Everett family's entire billion-dollar empire could easily collapse by the end of the week. Isabelle felt strangely, beautifully calm in her soul. I honestly didn't do any of this for petty revenge. No, Catherine agreed, her eyes full of respect. You absolutely didn't. You did it because the quiet one in the room sees the ugly truth, and the absolute truth desperately needs to be told. Back at her cozy midtown apartment, Isabelle happily found her father wearing a tool belt, busily installing additional heavy-duty security locks on all her windows, while Martha happily organized the newly delivered, beautiful white nursery furniture. The small, sunny space was slowly but surely shifting from just empty walls into something that truly resembled a warm, loving home. How did the big meeting go? Joseph asked, setting down his heavy tools and wiping his brow. Before Isabelle could even open her mouth to answer him, her phone buzzed. Aggressively. It was a massive news alert. Breaking news. Everett Holdings under massive federal investigation. Stock price plummets globally. Martha immediately appeared from the nursery doorway, wiping yellow paint from her hands on a rag. Well, so that's exactly why the evil Margaret Everett has been frantically calling my cell phone all morning long. I finally just blocked her number completely. Isabelle held up the phone and showed them the explosive article. Within mere minutes, dozens more frantic alerts rolled in as absolutely every other major news outlet on the globe picked up the massive story. Her phone started to ring incessantly. Hungry journalists, fake old friends, and distant, opportunistic relatives, all desperately wanting an exclusive comment. Turn it entirely off, Joseph advised wisely, stepping forward. Let Catherine, the shark, handle the media frenzy. Isabelle nodded in agreement, and completely powered down her phone. She stepped peacefully into the nursery doorway, taking in the beautiful sight of the half-assembled crib and the incredibly soft, warm yellow walls. Her mother had stubbornly insisted on physically painting the entire nursery herself. Because absolutely every single baby desperately needs a bright sunshine room, she had said. And the small, comfortable rocking chair sitting in the corner, a highly thoughtful gift from Molina, added a perfect, deeply personal touch to the space. I honestly never, ever wanted any of my life to become this highly public, Isabelle said softly, leaning against the doorframe. I just desperately wanted basic justice. Martha came over and stood closely beside her, wrapping an arm around her waist. There is absolutely nothing wrong with wanting justice, sweetheart. Joseph proudly joined them, his tall, imposing frame completely filling the small doorway. The quiet ones, he said, his voice thick with emotion, often have the absolute most important things in the world to say. He paused, looking at his daughter with immense pride, then added, Your brilliant grandmother used to always say that to me. Isabelle smiled warmly, instantly remembering the incredibly soft, hand-knitted baby blanket that was now safely tucked away in the baby's dresser. She was absolutely right. A loud knock at the front door suddenly made them all tense up in fear for a moment, but it was thankfully only Molina arriving, carrying several large bags of delicious-smelling takeout food. You are literally all over the global news, she announced excitedly, setting down the heavy bags of food on the counter. The entire internet is absolutely exploding right now. People everywhere are actively calling you a feminist. Hero. I'm definitely not a hero, Isabelle protested, shaking her head humbly. No, Molina agreed with a wide, proud grin, setting down the containers. You're just the quiet one who finally bravely spoke up and burned it all down. Now, come eat something hot, she added bossily. That growing baby desperately needs nourishment, and we've still got a ton of heavy nursery furniture to assemble tonight. As they happily gathered around Isabelle's small, cozy dining table, laughing and eating together, she physically felt the baby move again. It was significantly stronger now, vastly more certain of its place, exactly like the undeniable truth finally rising powerfully to the surface. It was exactly like silence finally finding its loud, beautiful voice. The bright morning sun streamed beautifully through the large windows of Isabelle's new workplace, casting warm, golden light across her neatly organized, modest desk. At 6 months pregnant, she had successfully found deep, profound comfort in the steady, honest routine of her new job at Anderson Construction. It was a small, wonderful, family-owned company with absolutely no hidden corporate agendas, no tangled financial schemes, just honest, hard work, and genuinely good, kind people. Carol Anderson, the sweet, maternal owner's wife, suddenly appeared beside her desk holding a steaming ceramic mug. At 70 years old, Carol treated absolutely every single employee in the building exactly like her own family. And she had taken a very particular, protective interest in Isabelle's well-being ever since recognizing her face from the exploding news coverage. "Thank you so much," Isabelle smiled warmly, gratefully accepting the hot tea. Her computer screen was completely filled with dozens of open news tabs. The Everett Holdings stock price had miraculously dropped yet another 15% overnight. The massive, highly publicized SEC investigation was actively wreaking absolute havoc on the corrupt company's market value. Her phone buzzed abruptly on the desk. It was an urgent text from Catherine Walsh. "Margaret Everett is holding a massive, live press conference at noon today. Nathaniel will be standing there with her." Isabelle's hand trembled very slightly as she set down the warm mug. After weeks of cowardly hiding out at the luxury lake house, Nathaniel was finally being forced to show his face to the world. The baby kicked hard, almost exactly as if sensing her rising, anxious tension. "Is it bad news?" Carol asked very gently, her kind eyes full of worry. "Just some complications," Isabelle replied softly, actively trying to minimize her panic. "It's nothing I can't handle." "Of course you can easily handle it, my dear," Carol said warmly, gently patting her shoulder. "The quiet ones in life always can." At lunch, Isabelle sat tensely in the small employee break room, anxiously watching the live press conference stream on her tablet. Melina had come over to join her on her lunch break, bringing fresh deli sandwiches. Absolutely neither of them took a single bite of the food. On the screen, Margaret Everett stood defiantly at a massive podium set up directly outside the towering Everett Holdings headquarters. She looked every inch the terrifying, unyielding family matriarch, dressed in an incredibly expensive, tailored power suit, her icy composure looking seemingly perfect. Nathaniel stood slightly behind her shoulder, looking appropriately, falsely contrite and ashamed in front of the flashing cameras. "My son has unfortunately made some very grave, personal mistakes in his marriage," Margaret announced to the massive press pool. Her loud voice carried that deeply familiar, highly toxic tone of tightly controlled, narcissistic manipulation. He has actively sought professional counseling for his anger management issues, and he is fully committed to making amends to his family. But these highly malicious, fake allegations of corporate financial misconduct are absolutely nothing more than the vindictive, desperate attacks of a sad, emotionally unstable woman scorned. Melina snorted loudly in disgust. "Wow, they're really going all in with the crazy hysterical wife angle. Huh?" Isabelle remained entirely silent, watching intently as Nathaniel slowly stepped forward to the array of microphones to speak. He looked significantly thinner than she remembered. His usual, highly confident, arrogant smile appeared, incredibly forced and deeply pained. "I deeply, profoundly regret my terrible actions that night," he said, robotically, obviously reading directly from highly manicured PR notes. Eve. Terribly let down my family, my wonderful company, and most importantly, my beloved wife and my unborn child. Isabelle, if you're watching this right now, I'm so incredibly sorry. Please, I beg you, let's handle this situation privately. As a family. The baby violently kicked again, significantly harder this time. Isabelle rubbed her stomach very soothingly, taking deep breaths. He's going to be absolutely, entirely shocked when the damning SEC findings finally go public, Molina commented, glaring at the screen. Tomorrow, Isabelle said very quietly, a small smile forming. Catherine just told me they're officially announcing the formal federal investigation tomorrow morning. Her phone buzzed loudly with a text message from her father. Please do not watch that pathetic media circus. Sweetheart, your mom is making your absolute favorite dinner tonight. Come straight here to the apartment after you get off work. Isabelle smiled genuinely and typed a quick, loving reply. Her amazing parents had permanently extended their stay in the city indefinitely, officially renting a small, beautifully furnished apartment nearby to be close to her. Joseph was successfully managing his consulting business remotely from a desk in the corner, and Martha had miraculously turned their small, temporary space into a highly warm, supportive, loving retreat for the family. That specific afternoon brought a highly unexpected, shocking surprise visitor to the front lobby of Anderson Construction, Cassandra Blake. She looked absolutely nothing like the polished, hyper-glamorous financial analyst Isabelle had confronted at the gala, dressed down in simple blue jeans and a baggy oversized sweater, completely devoid of heavy makeup. She waited, incredibly nervously, in the modest reception area. I'm absolutely not here to cause you any more trouble, Cassandra said very quickly, her voice shaking as Isabelle cautiously approached her. I really needed you to know the truth. They're actively trying to legally pin absolutely everything on Nathaniel to save the company. Margaret is entirely orchestrating the whole cover-up. She's completely making him the sacrificial scapegoat for her own crimes. Isabelle silently studied the anxious woman who had once been her husband's arrogant mistress. Cassandra's expensive designer polish was completely gone. Her bare hands were twitching highly anxiously as they frantically fidgeted with her car keys. Why on earth are you coming here telling me this? Isabelle asked, narrowing her eyes. Because the quiet one absolutely deserves to know the full truth, Cassandra replied softly, ironically echoing Isabelle's own powerful words from their SEC interviews. And because I'm completely, utterly done being terrified of them. Back at the safety of her desk, Isabelle immediately called Catherine to relay the shocking conversation. The brilliant lawyer's response was incredibly swift and tactical. This entirely changes our legal strategy. If the evil Margaret is actually trying to quickly contain the massive damage by permanently sacrificing her own son to the feds, Isabelle said, pacing the room, Then she's getting incredibly desperate. She glanced affectionately at the beautiful framed ultrasound photo sitting on her desk. Her baby was growing strong and perfectly healthy at the last checkup. What exactly do you need me to do now? Absolutely nothing yet, Catherine replied, her tone fiercely confident. You just stay entirely focused on your beautiful new life. Let me handle completely destroying Margaret Everett. After work, Isabelle drove peacefully to her parents' apartment, following the now highly familiar, comforting route through Manhattan's busy evening traffic. The massive city felt completely different to her now. It was absolutely no longer a terrifying, overwhelming place. The city had once merely been the glamorous, fake backdrop to her carefully constructed, toxic life as an elite Everett, but now it had miraculously become a wonderful place of genuine, fresh, new beginnings. Martha threw open the apartment door before Isabelle could even raise her hand to knock, pulling her daughter into a massive, warm hug that smelled wonderfully of home-cooked comfort food. Did you have a bad day? Her mother asked incredibly gently, brushing her hair back. Just a highly complicated day, Isabelle corrected with a smile, stepping happily into the enveloping warmth of her family. But I'm totally okay. Joseph looked up proudly from his laptop, where he'd been working diligently. Remotely. The quiet one absolutely always is, he said with a warm, small smile. Isabelle settled comfortably onto the soft couch, gratefully accepting a hot plate of her mother's amazing cooking. Outside the window, Manhattan's millions of lights began to sparkle brilliantly in the early evening dusk. Somewhere far out in the massive city, the desperate Everetts were undoubtedly frantically plotting their next doomed legal move. But right here in this specific, beautiful moment, the quiet one was exactly, perfectly where she needed to be. Entirely surrounded by undeniable truth, massive strength, and unconditional love. The SEC's massive, highly anticipated official announcement hit the city exactly like a deafening thunderclap across New York's entire business community. Isabelle watched quietly from her desk at Anderson Construction as the explosive headlines flooded the internet in real time. Everett Holdings placed under massive federal investigation for billion-dollar financial fraud. Family Charity Foundation heavily implicated in multi-million-dollar international laundering scheme. Margaret Everett abruptly steps down in disgrace as board chair. At exactly 7 months pregnant now, Isabelle actually felt her baby actively respond to her rapidly quickening pulse as she eagerly read the highly detailed federal reports. The massive mountain of hard evidence she had spent many agonizing, terrifying months meticulously compiling had miraculously helped federal agents uncover over 10 years of highly systematic, global corporate fraud, with the arrogant Margaret Everett sitting right at the absolute center of the criminal spiderweb. Her phone buzzed violently with an urgent message from Catherine. Turn on Channel 4. Right now. Carol Anderson happily appeared mere moments later carrying a small break room TV. quickly setting it up on Isabelle's desk as shocked coworkers quietly gathered around to watch the spectacle. On the screen, Margaret Everett stood rigidly on the federal courthouse steps. Her once perfect, icy composure finally, visibly beginning to fracture into a million pieces. These federal allegations are completely, utterly baseless, she declared, loudly to the press, but her usually commanding voice trembled noticeably. My brilliant son and I proudly built this massive company entirely with honor and absolute integrity. A bold reporter aggressively cut in, shouting over her, "Mrs. Everett, can you officially comment on the hard evidence provided by your own daughter-in-law? Specifically, the heavily documented illegal wire transfers to the offshore shell accounts?" The camera perfectly captured Margaret's face violently hardening into a mask of pure hatred. Isabelle Calderon is a deeply disturbed, highly hysterical young woman who is desperately seeking petty revenge over a failed, miserable marriage. She's actually, another loud reporter interrupted, shutting her down. The absolute key, verified whistleblower in the massive SEC's federal case. Their official report formally confirms her evidence was 100% independently verified by forensics. Your very own daughter-in-law successfully helped expose an entire decade of your financial crimes. Isabelle watched in awe as Margaret's entire arrogant facade violently cracked. On live television, the cruel woman who had constantly humiliated her at social events aggressively whispered terrible threats to her behind closed doors and treated her daily with nothing but icy disdain, now suddenly looked incredibly small, pathetic, and deeply afraid. They're taking her in for federal questioning right now. Catherine quickly texted Nathaniel, too. It's really happening. Carol gently and proudly squeezed Isabelle's tense shoulder. Are you going to be okay, dear? Yes, Isabelle replied softly, a tear of relief escaping her eye. And for the very first time in her entire life, it felt entirely, 100% true. Later that same afternoon, senior investigator Robert Chin from the SEC arrived, personally at Anderson Construction with massive news far too highly sensitive to share over a phone line. They are officially offering us a plea deal, he said quietly, sitting inside Carol's private office, which she'd fiercely insisted they use for privacy. Nathaniel is completely willing to testify under oath directly against his own mother. He'll eagerly provide full, undeniable details about the entire laundering operation. Isabelle sat incredibly still in her chair, one hand resting highly protectively on her belly. In exchange for exactly what? He gets absolutely no federal jail time, but he will pay massive, crippling financial penalties and receive a permanent, lifetime ban from all corporate business activities, Chin explained smoothly. He is also entirely willing to sign an uncontested, immediate divorce agreement today, granting full, absolute parental custody to you, and offering a highly fair, massive financial settlement. Why is he doing this now? Isabelle asked, though she already deeply sensed the true answer. Chin gave a very small, highly satisfied smile. Because the quiet one's hard. Evidence was simply far too strong for his lawyers to fight in court. And because the evil Margaret Everett arrogantly kept highly detailed, written records of her own crimes as insurance blackmail against anyone ever turning on her, including throwing her own son under the bus. That evening, Isabelle sat peacefully in her parents' comfortable apartment, happily watching the setting sun beautifully bathe the entire Manhattan skyline. In shades of warm gold and deep violet, the evening news played softly in the background, endlessly showing dramatic footage of Nathaniel being aggressively escorted in handcuffs into a towering federal building. I honestly never, ever wanted to completely destroy their lives, she said. Quietly, almost in a whisper. Joseph looked up sharply from his daily crossword puzzle. No, you didn't. You simply wanted the absolute truth to be told. They completely destroyed themselves, desperately trying to hide it in the dark. Martha emerged warmly from the kitchen carrying a fresh, steaming pot of chamomile tea. How's the little one handling all this massive excitement today? Isabelle smiled widely, feeling yet another strong, reassuring kick against her ribs. Very active today. Like mother. Like child. I guess. She's a born fighter. Martha nodded in deep, loving approval. Just significantly quieter about it. Her phone suddenly lit up with dozens of incoming messages. Melina was excitedly sharing highly supportive texts. Catherine was professionally updating her on the finalized legal developments. Even Cassandra was checking in on her. The shallow woman who had once been her bitterest rival had miraculously become a highly unexpected, valuable ally in exposing the ultimate truth. A final, incoming text abruptly appeared from a completely unknown number. I am so incredibly sorry for absolutely everything. N. Isabelle stared blankly at the pathetic message from her soon-to-be ex-husband. She spent a moment thinking of the highly charming, handsome man she had once so foolishly loved, then the incredibly controlling, deeply broken, cruel monster he had slowly become. And now, he was nothing more than a fallen, pathetic figure desperately seeking cheap redemption through federal plea deals. The quiet one sees absolutely everything, she whispered softly to her unborn child, running her hand over her belly, including knowing exactly when it's finally time to permanently close a toxic chapter and bravely move forward. Outside the window, a massive summer storm slowly rolled across the sprawling city. Isabelle watched peacefully as bright lightning lit up the dark clouds, deeply thinking about how incredibly, vastly different her entire life had become in just a few short, chaotic months. The carefully, highly polished facade of the billion-dollar Everett empire had completely, utterly crumbled into dust, not through dramatic, screaming exposés or violent, physical confrontations, but entirely through the quiet, meticulous, persistent hard work. of a woman they had all foolishly underestimated. Thunder rumbled deeply in the distance, and the baby kicked strongly again. Isabelle smiled, gently resting her hand exactly where she'd felt the movement. The quiet one's child was undeniably strong, highly active, and completely alive. With infinite possibility, just exactly like its mother. More tea? Martha offered sweetly, holding out a steaming, fragrant cup. Isabelle accepted it incredibly gratefully, breathing deeply in its soothing warmth. Did you ever possibly imagine, back when you bravely left William, that you'd one day be here helping me survive through something exactly like this? Martha settled comfortably beside her daughter on the plush couch. I always deeply imagined that you'd be significantly stronger than I ever was. And you absolutely are. We both were incredibly strong, Isabelle corrected her gently, resting her head on her mother's shoulder. Just in our own, highly different ways. Joseph folded his newspaper neatly and proudly joined his two favorite women by the large window. Together, as a united family, they quietly watched the beautiful summer storm roll completely over Manhattan, nature's own spectacular display of absolute power and necessary renewal. The quiet one had finally permanently found her powerful voice, and the roaring thunder answered her back with massive approval. Exactly 2 months after the massive Everett empire completely crumbled to the ground, Isabelle sat peacefully in a wooden rocking chair by the large nursery window of her sunny midtown apartment, happily watching the bright sunrise dawn over the city. At 9 months pregnant, she physically felt the full, heavy weight of her impending, joyful motherhood, and deeply reflected on the incredible, harrowing journey that had finally brought her safely here. That morning's printed edition of the New York Times lay folded on the small side table. The bold front page headline proudly read, Margaret Everett officially pleads guilty to massive financial fraud. Faces 15 years in federal prison. Beside the newspaper, the finalized divorce papers bore fresh, legal signatures, permanently granting Isabelle absolute, full parental custody of her unborn child, along with a massive financial settlement that would forever secure their future beyond any doubt. The nursery walls still painted the incredibly gentle, soothing yellow her mother had loving chosen, glowed beautifully in the warm morning light. A gorgeous, handmade quilt, Carol Anderson's thoughtful gift to her newest grandbaby, was draped lovingly over the wooden crib rail. On the white dresser, her late grandmother's soft, knitted blanket waited patiently and eagerly for its brand new owner. Can't sleep? Martha suddenly appeared warmly in the doorway, already fully dressed and prepared for the busy day ahead. She had stubbornly and lovingly insisted on staying in the city through the birth. And for once, Isabelle hadn't even bothered to protest. Need some help? Isabelle smiled widely, lovingly rubbing her massive belly. Your granddaughter is currently practicing her heavy kickboxing routine in here. The quiet one's daughter apparently isn't so quiet, Martha replied with a bright, genuine grin. She handed over a fresh cup of her signature. Soothing. Humiliated. And settled comfortably into the second wooden rocking chair in the room, a highly thoughtful addition purchased by Joseph, who firmly believed that absolutely every single nursery needed a dedicated, comfortable spot for Grandma. I got an incredibly interesting phone call yesterday, Isabelle said, taking a slow sip of her hot tea. The massive women's shelter downtown really wants me to officially join their executive board of directors. They firmly think that sharing my survival story might actively help other abused women find their own voices. Will you do it? Isabelle nodded very slowly, a look of profound determination in her eyes. Not for the media publicity, but if the quiet one's dark experience can successfully help even just one other woman find her inner strength, then yes, she trailed off with a gasp as the baby kicked particularly hard against her ribs. The happy, cheerful sound of Joseph's quiet whistling drifted pleasantly up from the small kitchen. He was likely already busy preparing a massive family breakfast. The deeply familiar, comforting tune blended perfectly with the early morning hum of busy city traffic from the street far below. It was the beautiful, chaotic soundtrack of Isabelle's brand new life. Her phone buzzed softly on the table. A text from Melina. Are you ready for your absolute last day before your maternity leave starts? The entire office has a massive surprise planned for you. Isabelle smiled warmly, fondly thinking of her wonderful, supportive co-workers at Anderson Construction. What had initially started merely as a temporary, desperate escape plan had beautifully, organically evolved into a highly genuine, fulfilling career. Just last week, Carol Anderson and her son had formally offered her a permanent, high-level role as the company's director of operations, stating they were deeply impressed by her meticulous attention to detail and her steady, empathetic leadership style. The quiet one definitely landed safely on her feet, Isabelle murmured to herself. You did significantly more than just land. Sweetheart, Martha said warmly, her eyes shining with pride. You absolutely soared. A cheerful knock at the front door announced Cassandra's early arrival for their weekly Sunday breakfast. It was yet another highly unexpected, beautiful turn in Isabelle's incredible new chapter. The two women, once bitter adversaries, trapped in a toxic man's web, had somehow found a profound common ground in their mutual healing. Their intense conversations had beautifully shifted away from federal legal testimony and evolved into a highly real, deeply honest, and supportive friendship. I brought those amazing, pregnancy-safe blueberry pastries you absolutely love, Cassandra called out happily, entering the kitchen carrying a large, grease-spotted bakery bag. And I have great news about the foundation case. The corrupt Everett Family Foundation's massive assets had been entirely frozen by the government, its cooked books currently under strict federal scrutiny. But the brilliant Isabelle had formulated a massive plan for that, too. She was actively working closely with Catherine Walsh to legally ensure that all the legitimate Innocent charitable causes wouldn't financially suffer for the Everett family's heinous crimes. The quiet one truly thinks of absolutely everything, Joseph said with a booming laugh, appearing in the doorway carrying a massive tray of hot breakfast essentials. As they all gathered happily together in Isabelle's small but incredibly sunlit dining room, the baby shifted heavily again, feeling strong, highly certain, and completely ready for the world. The doctor had said it could literally happen any day now. Her hospital bag was perfectly packed by the door. The sunny nursery was entirely ready, and her fiercely loyal support system was permanently in place. I've been thinking a lot about baby names lately, Isabelle said, gratefully, accepting a warm pastry from Cassandra's hands. I really want to name that. Profoundly means true strength, but absolutely not one of the obvious cliché choices. The quiet kind of strength, Martha nodded in deep, maternal understanding. Dawn, Isabelle said softly, her eyes shining. It means the beautiful beginning of the light, exactly when the darkness finally fades away and the absolute truth emerges. Cassandra proudly raised her teacup into the air. To Dawn, then, and to her incredible mother, who actively taught us all about the massive, unstoppable power of quiet strength. The bright sun had fully risen over the city now, beautifully painting the entire Manhattan skyline in a warm, golden promise of tomorrow. Isabelle actually felt dawn move lower within her, feeling incredibly strong and absolutely certain, completely ready for her own grand emergence into the world. The quiet one's daughter would absolutely be born into a world of pure light and undeniable truth, totally surrounded by fierce love and authentic, deep human connection. Sometimes, Isabelle said thoughtfully, peacefully watching the massive city slowly wake up beyond her windows, the absolute quietest voice in the room carries the absolute strongest truth. Martha lovingly squeezed her daughter's hand. And sometimes, the absolute quietest person sitting in the back of the room is exactly the one who is secretly writing the entire story. Joseph's steady, protective presence, Cassandra's reformed, genuine friendship, Melina's fierce, unwavering support, Carol's warm, maternal encouragement, absolutely all the beautiful, golden threads of her new life were perfectly woven together into something incredibly real. It wasn't a fake PR performance. It wasn't a carefully crafted mask, but a rock-solid foundation, built entirely on massive, quiet strength. Dawn kicked hard again, and Isabelle smiled a wide, genuine smile. The quiet one's terrifying journey had beautifully become something vastly larger than herself alone. It was absolutely not a tragic ending, but a glorious new beginning, acting as silent and as profoundly powerful as the bright sunrise currently breaking outside her window. In the very end, her journey wasn't just about winning a lawsuit or getting petty revenge. It was entirely about finding her true voice, embracing her undeniable truth, and finding her own dawn. The quiet one had proudly risen from the ashes, and her brilliant, blazing light would now help thousands of others find their way out of the dark. Exactly 1 year later, the bright morning sun poured warmly into Isabelle's newly expanded, beautiful midtown apartment, catching the glint of a silver frame resting on her polished desk. Inside the frame was a vibrant photo Dawn Elaine Calderon, now age 1, laughing uproariously in her grandfather Joseph's strong arms, while Martha looked on with absolute, pure adoration. The beautiful baby's honey-colored eyes, so exactly like her mother's, sparkled brilliantly with pure joy, her dark, unruly curls catching in the warm summer breeze. Isabelle expertly adjusted her laptop screen, meticulously preparing for a massive, virtual board meeting with the directors of the Downtown Women's Shelter, their highly successful new outreach program, appropriately named Quiet Strength, had already successfully helped dozens of abused women safely find their voices, leave their abusers, and permanently rebuild their shattered lives. Sitting proudly on her desk, directly beside Dawn's photo, sat a heavy, polished, brass plaque, Isabelle Calderon, Director of Operations, Anderson Construction. And resting right beside it was a sweet, handwritten note from Carol Anderson that simply read, "The quiet ones lead best." The massive, ugly Everett scandal had long since completely faded from the front page headlines. Margaret was currently serving out her harsh sentence in a federal prison, and a broke, disgraced Nathaniel had permanently relocated to the West Coast after fully fulfilling the strict terms of his federal plea agreement. The Everett Family Foundation's remaining seized assets had been brilliantly restructured into a brand new, highly transparent charitable trust, now fully overseen by a strict, independent board. That board proudly included Cassandra Blake, whose own incredible journey of redemption and truth-telling had actively inspired many other women across corporate America to bravely speak up against systemic corruption. From the sunlit living room down the hall, Dawn's contagious, bubbly laughter echoed loudly as Melina chased her playfully around the couch. The distant sounds of honking traffic below mixed perfectly with the quiet, comforting hum of safe domestic life. It was a profound peace she had fiercely earned, and a true happiness she had bravely reclaimed. Isabelle warmly reached out for the well-worn, soft baby blanket her late grandmother had knitted, now draped comfortably over the back of her office chair. A new, urgent message popped up on her computer screen. "Ready when you are. Women's Shelter Director." The quiet one had finally, permanently found her powerful voice, and now she would dedicate her life to helping others find theirs. Not with angry shouting, not with a flashy, fake spectacle, but with the steady, unyielding, and unwavering strength of the absolute truth, finally spoken aloud. Dawn suddenly burst joyfully into the home office, toddling fast on unsteady, chubby feet, reaching her small arms up for her mother with absolute, pure trust and boundless joy. Isabelle happily lifted her beautiful daughter high into the air, breathing deeply in her sweet, familiar baby scent, and smiled a smile that reached her soul. Some stories in life tragically end in roaring thunder and destruction. But the absolute best ones, she'd learned through the fire, end beautifully with the quiet, unbroken promise of a bright new dawn. Dear friend, hey, can I ask you something very important before you go? Are you actually still here with me right now, sitting in this exact moment? If you are truly still here reading or listening to these final words after absolutely everything we just went through, that genuinely means something profound. It means you felt something real today. And maybe, just maybe, you actually saw a tiny, hidden part of yourself beautifully reflected in Isabelle's incredible, quiet strength. Some storms in life aggressively roar and destroy, while others simply whisper and rebuild. And some of the absolute most powerful, earth-shattering voices in this world are the exact ones we almost completely miss, right up until they finally decide to rise. You absolutely do not have to be loud to be incredibly brave. You do not have to be flashy or bold to be completely unbreakable. Sometimes, simply choosing to stay in the fight, consistently showing up for yourself every single day, and finally listening to that quiet, persistent inner voice inside your soul, that is the definition of real, undeniable courage. Ancient Stoic wisdom beautifully teaches us not to frantically chase control over the chaotic outside world, but to fiercely pursue absolute mastery over ourselves. Isabelle didn't aggressively fight the toxic noise of her abusers. She simply, powerfully embraced her own undeniable truth. And you, my dear friend, have that exact same massive fire quietly waiting deep inside of you, too. Because sometimes, the absolute softest voice in the room ultimately holds the loudest, most undeniable truth. If this powerful story deeply resonated and stayed with your heart today, please take just 1 second to tap that like button below. It honestly helps this community grow significantly more than you know. Please share this video with someone in your life who really needs to hear it today to find their own strength. And please, subscribe to our channel right now for more incredible stories that absolutely don't just entertain you, but speak profoundly and directly to the human heart. Thanks so much for staying with me until the very end. I see you. I believe in your quiet strength. And I'm so incredibly glad you are here. See you in the next video.